A manhunt to find those most wanted. The new series of Rise of the Nazis continues tonight at 9. Back to this afternoon now on BBC Two and a Politics Live conference special.
The Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey, prepares for his big conference speech. Is his party a credible alternative to the Conservatives and Labour? This is Politics Live. With me in the studio for this Politics Live special, our political correspondent, Jessica Parker. Today, Ed Davey puts health at the heart of his pitch. The Lib Dem leader says his party will boost cancer survival rates. So, will that appeal to disaffected Tory voters? Also today...
I have spent my life fighting Thatcherism. I never thought I'd have to do it here.
There's been a big row about the party's housing targets.
Not to rejoin the EU. That's the big question.
We're campaigning hard on Europe, as you know, my friend.
And will Ed Davey say anything about Brexit? Welcome to this Politics Live special, where we'll have live, uninterrupted coverage of Sir Ed Davey's speech to party conference. It's the first in-person autumn conference speech for him as leader. It could, of course, be the last before a general election next year. Let's just dip into the hall where members are gathering. You can see there on the right the party's deputy leader there on the stage, Daisy Cooper. We're going to talk to her, interview her after Ed Davey's speech. He's supposed to take to the stage in just over 8 minutes' time, and he's expected to talk for about 45 or 50 minutes. Well, let's talk to Jessica Parker here and get a sense and a flavour of where the party is and what sort of year they've had.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Lib Dems are in a pretty good mood at the moment. They've obviously had by-election wins recently, including this year. They did well in the local council elections, of course, in May, and they've got quite a good ground force now of local councillors ahead of next year's likely general election, which will be important for them. I think, though, maybe they're still suffering from a problem of getting noticed. I mean, Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, fourth largest party, but it means in Prime Minister's Questions, for example, he only gets a question every few weeks. And it was interesting on Sunday when he was talking on the Laura Kuenssberg programme. They presented him with some research, a sort of word cloud of what do the Liberal Democrats stand for, and it seemed like lots of people weren't exactly sure. So I think with just 15 MPs getting themselves heard, being able to make their case to the electorate and cutting through all the political noise, because it has been quite a noisy time in British politics. That's a kind of big challenge for them, and one of the reasons that Ed Davey's speech today is going to be really important.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a perennial problem, isn't it, for the Liberal Democrats to get noticed for the reasons that you have said. A general election, of course, they have the opportunity to compete slightly more favourably against the Conservatives and the Labour Party. But the pitch does seem to be quite clear. It is about taking as many seats from the Conservatives as possible because of the recent by-election wins, which they've traditionally also been good at.
Good at by-elections, good at really honing in on local issues and kind of maximising their chances. I think what you're going to see, from what I understand from the Liberal Democrats over the next year, is ruthlessly targeting seats that they really think they can win. It won't be a big national strategy. No. It'll be, right, we want to get this seat off the Conservatives. This is how many votes we'll need to win. What are the issues in that area? And then they'll throw the kitchen sink at it. So that seems to be their strategy. But also, more broadly as well, they are talking a lot about health. And that's what we're going to hear, I think, in his speech, probably.
Well, yes, and you're absolutely right, that health will be at the centre of his speech. Well, let's get the view from Bournemouth itself, where the conference is being held. Our political correspondent, Hen Cat, is there.
When Sir Ed Davey opened the conference back on Saturday, he was absolutely clear that this was about firing the starting gun on the general election campaign for the Liberal Democrats. Now, since then, this being Lib Dem conference, we've seen a fair few stunts. We've seen him on bikes. We've seen him tipped out of kayaks, but underneath that, there is a party that has a real seriousness of focus. They think they have got the momentum, they think they can win seats from the Tories, and they've got a strategy to do it. And that involves very, very carefully targeting Conservative seats and fighting them in a very localised way. So over the course of this conference, we've seen them shift policy to try and back that up, to reassure voters in those sort of seats. Policy shifts like dropping the penny on income tax to fund health. Now, it hasn't all been plain sailing for the leadership here in Bournemouth. They did lose a vote yesterday in an attempt to scrap the headline target of 380,000 homes being built every year. There's also been a bit of tension that Sir Ed doesn't seem to have been a bit reluctant to fully embrace the idea of rejoining the EU. The party's longer-term objective is to be back in the European Union. It's off the table for now, but he's seemed reluctant to say that, and there has been a bit of concern, a bit of disquiet here at the conference about that. So when Ed Davey takes to the stage in a bit, he will be reinforcing this strategy they've got of trying to talk about the issues that he says voters are telling them about health. Absolutely foremost here. And so he will be making a big pitch on health. He'll be tying it explicitly to the economy and saying that will be a big part of the Lib Dems' plan, is to rebuild the economy by fixing the healthcare system. And he will be there, of course, to buoy up his activists. This is a party that thinks it's got the momentum. He's going to tell them it's their job to bring the blue wall tumbling down. This is actually Ed Davey's first speech to the autumn conference as leader. It could well be the last before the general election, so no pressure.
So, Helen Catt there in Bournemouth. Let's talk a little bit more about what is going to be pledged by Ed Davey, particularly for cancer patients.
Yes, so what we understand is he's going to say they want to see a new legal right for patients to start treatment within 62 days of a diagnosis. And this plays into a wider effort by the Lib Dems to talk a lot about social care. So obviously they've been making social care pledges and now they'll make this cancer pledge. And it seems to be an effort to appeal to some of those maybe older Conservative voters who they're really trying to target at the next general election. And as well, I think talking to Lib Dems and Lib Dem activists, what they say is when they are knocking on doors, which they're trying to do as much as possible, that is one of the issues that really is coming out on the doorstep as a big deal for voters. The NHS, the health service, the treatment that people are getting. So the Lib Dems are really trying to respond to that and I guess come up with eye-catching policies that they think will appeal to people.
Well, one of their policies, of course, has been overruled already by younger members of the party, the Young Liberals. Their plan to scrap the 380,000 a year house building target. Young Liberals tabled what's called Amendment 1 to restore it, and the former Liberal Democrat leader, Tim Farron, reacted in this way.
Of Amendment 1 do not mean it, but it is pure Thatcherism. A laissez-faire, free market, winner-takes-all bonus for those who see houses as capital investments, holiday hideaways, nice little pension pots, but not homes for the millions who need them. Amendment 1 could be, despite the wonderful speeches genuinely made in favour of it, the most right-wing thing I've seen at party conference since we set Liz Truss off to go and work undercover.
Well, he was certainly very fired up about it, wasn't he, Tim Farron? But how embarrassing for the leadership.
Yes, a stormy moment at the Liberal Democrat conference. So they'd wanted to replace it with a target, I think, of 150,000 social homes. The point they were making, the leadership, was, look, you can have these housing targets, but Tim Farron saying there, they think that's just actually benefiting property developers, for example, and you're not building the right kinds of homes that are actually needed. But it's so interesting that tension there, because I've talked about policies that maybe are designed to appeal more to older voters, but of course the Liberal Democrats, back in the days of abolished tuition fees, they were a party of young people. They really appealed to the youth, and now the youth are saying, well, hang on, we don't like this housing policy and we want to reverse it, and they managed to.
Well, and they really are holding their feet to the fire, the leadership. Let's chat about Brexit, because you've been in Brussels for quite some time, an expert on these things, and Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader, has come under fire on not being more passionate about rejoining the EU.
So he is saying, and I did an interview with him last week, he is saying that voters on the doorstep aren't talking about Brexit and they need to respond to that. But there are certainly people in the party who are saying, well, even if that's true, even if voters aren't talking about Brexit, we're politicians, we are political leaders, and we should be leading the conversation in terms of what we believe. And at their heart, the Liberal Democrats you would see them as a rejoined party. But I actually said to Sir Ed Davey, I said, well, OK, are you the party of rejoin? And he wouldn't say yes. And again, he was grilled about this on Sunday. And he'll say, we want to build a better relationship. It's no secret we want to be at the heart of Europe. But he seems very eager to keep it at arm's length, that idea.
But he does want to rejoin the EU at some point, isn't it? Their long-term policy?
Yeah, exactly. So they've got a kind of couple of policies floating around. There's a sort of 4-stage plan to get closer to Europe and then an eventual aim, but it's not one that he is really talking about at the moment.
Well, let's go inside the hall because members are on their feet and there is Sir Ed Davey being welcomed onto the stage. We've just seen a film of him leading up to his speech this year in Bournemouth. It's quite traditional to have that warm-up film to welcome the leader. He's enjoying his moment, and why not, since, as I say, it's been his first in-person one.
Thank you, friends. I'm afraid I have to start this afternoon with an apology. You might remember, after our incredible victory in Somerton and Frome in July, when the amazing Sarah Dyke overturned a Conservative majority of 19,000, I said it's time to get these clowns out of number 10. We even wrote it on the side of a big blue cannon. Do you remember? Well, a party member got in touch afterwards to say he is an actual clown. And he took great offence at being compared to the Conservative government. And on reflection, I have to admit, he's got a point. Clowns didn't crash our economy and send interest rates soaring. Clowns didn't let water companies make billions in profits while dumping filthy sewage into our rivers and onto our beaches. Clowns didn't plunge our NHS into crisis, pushing waiting lists to record highs. Clowns didn't waste billions of pounds of our money on dodgy PPE contracts. Clowns didn't prop up a lying, law-breaking Prime Minister and then allow him to put his cronies in the House of Lords. Clowns didn't do it. The Conservatives did. So, let me take this opportunity to apologise unreservedly to that party member and to the whole clowning community. I'm sorry, I used the wrong C word. So let me try again. It's time to get these Conservatives out of number 10. And Liberal Democrats, we've made a great start. Sarah Green in Buckinghamshire, Helen Morgan in Shropshire, Richard Ford in Devon, and now Sarah Dyke in Somerset. And next up, of course, the wonderful Emma Holland-Lindsay in Mid-Bedfordshire. Friends, our by-election record in the last 2.5 years is nothing less than historic. And so too have been our fantastic local election results. This May, we gained an incredible 407 councillors right across England, from Sunderland to South Hams, from Lewes to Lancaster, and gained control of 12 more councils. In Scotland last year, we boosted our councillor base by 1/3. We're growing back there strongly too, as we hold the Nationalists to account for the total mess they made of, well, everything. And in Wales, we took control of Powys Council for the first time ever. Liberal Democrats right across our United Kingdom, you should all be so proud of what we've achieved together. Our campaigns, our victories, are changing the future of British politics and turning the tide against the Conservatives. We've shown the next election won't be all about the red wall. It's about the blue wall too. Former Tory heartlands where we've shown we are the only ones who can win, the only ones who can bring the change people crave. And even better, with Richard's win in Devon, Sarah's in Somerset, and superb local government success, we can now proudly say the Liberal Democrats are back in the West Country. A second front against the Conservatives where every Liberal Democrat vote is the powerful vote for change. But now comes the big one, the general election. For the British people, the next general election can't come quickly enough. People are desperate for change. And while Rishi Sunak clings on, out of touch and out of ideas, our job, our responsibility, is to show the British people that positive change is possible and that we are ready to fight for it whenever the election comes. And this week, we've done just that. We've shown that we have the policies, the passion, and the people, not just to get the Conservatives out, but to deliver the real change people want, the fair deal people deserve. Our task is to get more brilliant Liberal Democrat MPs elected so they can be strong local champions for their communities and lead the change our country needs, bringing real hope to millions in this economic crisis. Hope to people struggling to get by and struggling to get on, cleaning up our environment, rescuing our NHS and care system, transforming our politics for good. Remember, at the start of the year, Sunak gave a big speech where he told the country, we're either delivering for you or we're not. Well, in fairness to Rishi, he was telling the truth. It is one of those two things, and friends, I think we all know which one. His government is failing to deliver. And what's so horrific is the sheer scale of their failure. In so many ways, our country today just isn't working the way it should. It's not working as it should for the parents, forced to travel 2 hours just to find their kids an NHS dentist, or skipping meals so their children can eat. It's not working for the couple in my constituency who fear losing their home of 13 years as their mortgage payments have shot up by more than £400 a month. It's not working for the teaching assistant and her young family, evicted from their home in Ambleside so the landlord could turn it into a holiday let. It's not working for the pensioner going without heat in the winter, or the commuter left on the platform by yet another cancelled train. It's not working for the swimmer who spent 13 days in hospital with cellulitis after swimming in sewage-infested water. Conference, I have never known our country so badly governed. Crimes unsolved, backlogs in our courts, delays to get a passport, crumbling school buildings, high streets in decline, and potholes everywhere. Now, there are many reasons why all these issues have got so bad, of course, but there is one fundamental cause, the Conservative Party. Britain isn't working because the Conservatives aren't working. They're more like a bad TV soap than a functioning government. The factions and the feuds, the personal vendettas, the shock exits and unwelcome returns. Each episode worse than the last. Well, it's time to change the channel. The corruption of Boris Johnson, the chaos of Liz Truss, the carelessness of Rishi Sunak. This whole Conservative shambles, they all have to go. And Liberal Democrats, our task is to get them out and then get Britain working again. And that, of course, starts with the economy. We need to get our economy growing strongly again. Conservative ministers might think 0% growth and 7% inflation are numbers to boast about, but the British people certainly don't. Do you know, inflation's still higher than any time since Black Wednesday, worse even than at the height of the financial crisis. Food prices up 30% in just 2 years. Energy bills almost doubled. Mortgage rates through the roof. And Rishi Sunak says this all shows his plan is working. Honestly, the Prime Minister sounds so complacent, so out of touch. Sometimes I think he must be reading the graphs upside down. Well, Rishi, if this is what it looks like when your plan is working, I think we need a new plan. And that's exactly what the Liberal Democrats have been putting forward. A real plan, not just to stop things getting worse, not just to return to business as usual, but to build the economy of the future. To build an economy that is genuinely innovative, prosperous, and fair. An economic plan that gives everyone the chance to get on in life and see their hard work and aspiration properly rewarded. A plan that backs entrepreneurs to grow their small businesses and create worthwhile, well-paid jobs in their communities. And yes, a plan to tackle the climate crisis, reach net zero, embrace the clean technologies of the future. It's time to lead the world instead of trying to hide from it. Conference after Rishi Sunak's disgraceful speech last week. The contrast between our approach and his could not be clearer. We already knew he doesn't care about tackling climate change. That's no surprise. But what about the damage his U-turns will do to our economy, to our car industry, to people's jobs right across the UK? Doesn't Sunak care about any of it? Apparently not. Frankly, instead of delivering that speech, Rishi should have torn it up and thrown it away. If he's got 7 bins, he might as well use them. Sunak's small-minded and backward-looking approach is simply not worthy of our great United Kingdom. From the steam train to the internet, Britain has always led the world with ingenuity and innovation. We are a nation of pioneers and inventors, not just in our history, but in our present and our future. Liberal Democrats understand that. In government, we made Britain the world leader in offshore wind. We invested early. We had an industrial strategy. We showed we were serious. We attracted global firms to come to the UK and spend tens of billions of pounds to build factories and wind farms and create thousands of clean, secure jobs. And thanks to Liberal Democrat policies, the price of wind energy has more than halved. So now, renewables are by far the cheapest form of electricity and the most popular. We could be doing the same thing with so many other new technologies: tidal power, clean flight, high-speed rail, creating jobs and cutting prices. But Rishi Sunak says no. We say build Britain's economic future here in the UK. Rishi Sunak says outsource it to China. That is a dismal failure of leadership, and we can do so much better. Britain led the world, and we can lead it again. But not with the Conservatives squabbling amongst themselves and clinging to the fossil fuels of the past. And not with the Prime Minister refusing even to attend the United Nations General Assembly last week. Instead of standing his lectern in Downing Street, single-handedly trashing our economic future, Rishi Sunak should have been in New York, working with global leaders to tackle this crisis together. Britain can be an incredible force for good when it stands tall on the world stage. But Rishi Sunak doesn't seem to care about that either. He's getting it wrong at home, and he's getting it badly wrong abroad too. Our vision is for a Britain that leads the world as we embrace the economy of the future. The Conservatives would only shackle us to the past. And there's another crucial part of our economic vision, another area where we are so different from this government. Something that would so obviously make an enormous difference to our economy and our standard of living. Something we have always been proud to champion, even when no one else even dared whisper it. Fixing our broken relationship with Europe. The Conservatives botched the deal with Europe, and it's been a disaster for the UK. They sold out British farmers and fishers. They tied up British business in red tape, and they pushed up food prices in our supermarkets. So much unnecessary pain inflicted on so many by so few. And only the Liberal Democrats have consistently stood up against it. Only we have set out a detailed plan to tear down those trade barriers, fix our broken relationship with Europe, and get a better deal for Britain. Yes, only we. Because Labour's plan, if you can call it a plan, is nowhere near that ambitious. Now, to be fair, they've come a long way from when they voted for Boris Johnson's terrible deal. But Labour has a long way still to go, which means it's up to us to lead the way. A better economy, a better future with Europe. Opportunity, investment, innovation, trade, that's the Liberal Democrat recipe for economic success. And one more ingredient: people. Because at its heart, what makes our approach different is that we understand that the economy isn't just a series of abstract percentages and meaningless slogans. It's all of us. It's the things we do every day together. It's the jobs we do, the services we rely on, the food we eat, the homes we live in. It's the TV shows we watch, the places we visit, the presents we give each other. We understand that when you strip everything else away, an economy is its people. And if we want to get our economy going strongly again, we need to focus far more on our people. Now, of course, that means investing in people through education, training, skills. But today I want to talk about another investment in people. An investment that too often has not been linked to economic growth, even though it's central to growth. And that's an investment in people's physical and mental health. We can't build the economy we need with 7 million people stuck on NHS waiting lists. We can't grow the economy with 2.5 million people shut out of the labour market by long-term physical and mental illness, when people aren't supported to recover from long COVID, wait weeks for a GP appointment, can't get basic help so they can get back to work, feed their families, and get on in life. A healthy economy needs a healthy population and a healthy NHS. And I've been so proud that we Liberal Democrats have consistently led the way in highlighting the crisis in the NHS and proposing solutions. Reversing cuts to GP numbers and guaranteeing an appointment when you need one. Tackling life-threatening ambulance delays and improving access to NHS dentists. There are so many parts of our NHS plan that will both treat people better and boost our economy. And today, I'd like to focus on one particular awful part of this health crisis that shatters lives and takes people in their prime. It can be very difficult to talk about. It's difficult for me, and I know it's difficult for many of you. But we do need to talk about it. And it's cancer. As many of you know, my brothers and I lost both our parents to cancer when we were young. My dad died aged 38, just a few months after being diagnosed with a cancer called Hodgkin lymphoma. I was only 4, so I don't remember it very well. What I do remember is my mum's grief and her incredible strength in the months and years that followed after being widowed so young with 3 boys under 10. Then, when I was 9, cancer came for Mum too. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I do remember how that felt. She had treatment, including a mastectomy. But 3 years later, they found secondary breast cancer, metastatic cancer, in her bones. And they told her it was incurable. Yet Mum refused to accept that it was incurable. She battled it for 3 years for her boys. She tried everything, including a naturopath, while we looked after her. It was hardest, of course, in the last 18 months or so as she became bedridden and the pain became excruciating. For me, caring for her became my life before school and after school. I'd sit for hours on her bed, talking to her, telling her about my day, listening to her stories, trying to make the most of every minute. When she was fighting the cancer with the naturopath, my top task was mashing up carrots and apples for the healthy juice drinks she lived on. Then was helping her with the pain, pouring out doses of morphine from this big bell jar we had in the kitchen. I don't think they'd allow that now. Putting pads on her legs and sides so she could give herself small electric shocks when the pain got really bad. It was a tough period as a teenager, but it was much, much tougher for Mum. Yet those years were also special. They gave me an incredible bond with my mum. She was so strong, so resilient, fighting to be with her boys, even in the face of such a cruel disease. I like to think I learnt a lot from her. I was 15 when she died. They'd put her on a totally unsuitable dementia ward in Nottingham General Hospital. I was visiting her on my way to school, in my school uniform, by her bedside when she died. Now, I don't tell you all this because I want you to feel sorry for me. Not at all. It was a long, long time ago, and I've been very lucky since. But I do tell you all about this because actually, too many families have their cancer stories, like mine, today. My family story isn't unique. There are millions of us whose lives get turned upside down by cancer. This very day, across the UK, 1,000 people will hear that fateful diagnosis. 1,000 people choking back tears as they try to process what it means for them. 1,000 people trying to figure out how to tell their loved ones, how to break the news to their partners, to their parents, to their children. And then 1,000 people wondering what comes next. Now, we are fortunate in this country that there are brilliant people in our NHS and in charities like Macmillan, and there is a story of progress and hope. Cancer mortality rates have fallen by 25% in the last 30 years. 10-year survival rates have doubled in the last 40. Diagnoses like both my parents were given are no longer necessarily the death sentence today that they were back then. Science and universal healthcare really are wonderful things. But I still think we could be doing so much better on cancer. Far too many people are still waiting far too long for a diagnosis or to start treatment after being diagnosed. And I'm afraid to say they've been let down and forgotten by this Conservative government. Last year, the government promised a new 10-year cancer plan. It was supposed to be a searching new vision for how we will lead the world in cancer care. This year, after 2 changes of Prime Minister and 3 changes of Health Secretary, that plan has been junked. Yet another casualty of all the Conservative chaos. Hopes raised only to be cruelly dashed. Because we do need a cancer plan. Despite all the progress, our survival rates still lag behind France, Germany, the US, and Japan. And the government is now missing every single one of its waiting time targets for cancer. And not by a little, but by a lot. Right now, there are more than 20,000 people across England who've been told they have suspected cancer, who've been referred for urgent treatment by their GP, but who've been waiting more than 2 months to start treatments. More than 2 months. Just imagine the fear, the anxiety, the helplessness. Knowing you need treatment, knowing every day could make a difference, but powerless to do anything but wait. Like Ian, an engineer I was speaking to just last week. Ian lives in Nottingham, just down the road from where I lived with Mum before she passed away. And like me, Ian lost both of his parents to cancer when he was young too. Ian had been fit and healthy all his life, but he was diagnosed with bowel cancer 2 years ago in his mid-60s. The National Screening Programme caught it early. It was a small stage 1 tumour. Crucially, it was operable. Ian needed chemotherapy and surgery as quickly as possible. But he was kept waiting for 4 months before starting any treatment. And now his cancer has progressed to stage 4, spread to his liver. Now it's inoperable. Ian calls those 4 months of waiting the worst time of his life. He told me, I would wake up every morning wondering if I had a future. And he told me how preventing those delays could not only have saved his own despair, but also saved the NHS so much money. Conference, it's just not right to keep people in such limbo for so long. We owe patients better than that. We owe their families, their children, and their loved ones better than that. We owe Ian better than that. We must do better than that. Just in the last few months, we have seen incredible breakthroughs that could revolutionize the way we diagnose and treat many types of cancer. Trials of a new blood test that can detect more than 50 types of cancer are really encouraging, and the head of the NHS says it could transform cancer care forever. A simple blood test you could even carry out at home. Or the new breast cancer drug trialed at the Royal Marsden Hospital. It's been shown to slow the growth of tumours and even shrink them in many cases, with far less debilitating side effects than chemotherapy. Just think what a difference breakthroughs like these could make. Think how much time they could save, how much misery they could prevent, how many lives they could save. And it's the job of government to back research like this, so scientists and doctors can make the next breakthrough, and the one after that, and the one after that. It's the job of government to make sure that whenever those breakthroughs happen, the NHS rolls out the benefits to patients as quickly as possible. If someone's life can be saved by a new blood test or a new drug, no unnecessary delays should stand in the way, and it's the job of government to make sure that we are diagnosing cancer as early as possible, that patients are starting treatment as early as possible, and that every patient gets the ongoing care and support they need. Now, friends, none of this actually should be party political. I know there are MPs in every party who have lost loved ones to cancer, like I did, or indeed who've battled cancer themselves. So I fervently hope we can build a consensus across politics to make cancer a top priority in the next Parliament. But as leader of our party, I can at least promise you this. For Liberal Democrat MPs, it will be a top priority. And that's why today I'm announcing our new and ambitious plan to end unacceptable cancer delays and boost survival rates. We will hold the government to account for every target it misses and every patient it fails. We will never stop fighting for better care for you and your loved ones. Of course, it's not just cancer where the government is letting patients down. It's pretty much everything. The Conservatives have broken promise after promise on the NHS, from their 40 new hospitals to 6,000 more GPs, to Rishi Sunak's pledge to bring waiting lists down. All of it, just meaningless noise. All a total con. Perhaps there should be a warning on the ballot paper, just like there is on cigarette packets. Voting Conservative is bad for your health. So it falls to us to rescue the NHS and make sure everyone can get the care they need when they need it. We know it won't be easy, but we see a bright future for the NHS, not because we are blind to the sheer scale of the crisis, but because we are clear-eyed about the solutions. More GPs, so that everyone can get an appointment within 7 days or 24 hours if it's urgent. More investment in the latest technology, from MRI scanners to radiotherapy machines. And, crucially, more carers. Conference, we know that the crisis in the NHS is inextricably linked to the crisis in care. We know that you can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. We know you can't fix the NHS without valuing family carers. Fix care, and you fix the NHS. Better social care, with many more care professionals better paid. More support for family carers, so people can cope better looking after loved ones. These are low-tech, affordable ways to save our NHS, investing in care. So people can be discharged more quickly, or don't need hospital care in the first place. So pressure on overstretched hospitals can be reduced. So patients aren't stuck for hours waiting to be seen in A&E. So ambulances aren't stuck for hours waiting outside A&E to hand over patients. Conference is all connected. Our plan for social care and family care is a central part of our plan for the future health service. And remember, in turn, health and care both are key parts of our plan for the economy. The Conservatives broke our economy with their carelessness. Liberal Democrats will fix our economy with care. Now, as we make our pitch to people, we need to show such real change is possible. We need to restore hope. When you look at the harm these Conservatives have done to people and done to our country, one of their worst is this: cynicism. When I speak to people on the doorstep or in my surgeries, I get a very clear impression of this. The idea that nothing can be done, that people in power don't care and won't fix things. A sense of hopelessness. The toxic brew of incompetence, scandal, and chaos served up by this government hasn't just poisoned people's views of the Conservative Party, but it's poisoned their trust in politics as a whole. Frankly, it's the only weapon the Conservatives have left. Convince people to expect less from government. Now, there are two ways to respond to the widespread cynicism the Conservatives foment. One way is simply to accept it. And that's the path that the Labour Party, sadly, seems to have chosen. Lower your sights. Give up on really changing things. Make your pitch nothing more than not as bad as the Tories. Half-heartedly oppose what the Conservatives are doing, and then shrug your shoulders and say, well, we pretty much do the same thing. That's one way of responding to the cynicism, but it is not the Liberal Democrat way. Our ambition for our country is so much greater than that. Our faith in the British people is much stronger than that. Our path, the path we have always chosen, the path we walk today, is to confront that cynicism head on, to offer people hope. Not with yet more platitudes and promises, not by announcing another nebulous mission that's immediately forgotten when the speech is over. No, by fighting for the big changes, the changes needed to restore people's trust in politics and rebuild their confidence in our public services. And that starts with political reform. Liberal Democrats have long known that Britain's political system is broken. Millions of people, powerless and excluded, robbed of their rightful say and unable to hold the powerful to account. And we've always fought to change that. But the Conservatives, instead of fixing our broken politics, have shattered it into pieces. Their constant attacks on the rule of law and traditional British freedoms, their betrayal of integrity, truth, and honesty, stuffing the Lords with Boris Johnson's lackeys, handing out billions in contracts to their cronies, one rule for them, another rule for the rest of us. And it wasn't just Boris Johnson. Owen Paterson, Neem Zahawi, Matt Hancock, Dominic Raab. So much sleaze, so many scandals. No wonder people are cynical. Clearing it up is no small task. It will take more than tinkering around the edges. We need to transform the nature of British politics itself, to make it more relevant, engaging, and responsive to people's needs and their dreams, to bring together our great family of nations instead of tearing it apart. And yes, at the heart of those reforms must be a fair electoral system. Proportional representation so everyone's vote counts equally. Because we know that the antidote to cynicism is not defeatism, it's empowerment, putting real power in every voter's hands to elect MPs who can't take them for granted, who have to listen to their concerns, who must work hard for them. Real power to hold politicians properly to account when they fail to deliver. Real power to demand better schools and hospitals, affordable housing and safe communities, and a clean, healthy environment. That's why fair votes is such an important part of the fair deal we're fighting for. Empowering people at the ballot box is the only way to make the big changes we need for our country. It's the only way to mend our broken politics, restore trust, and offer real hope. But when we listen to people, we do get it. It is hard to hope right now. With everything we've been through, the years of conservative neglect, the multiple crises we face, and with a terrible war still waging on our continent, it's hard to hope. So I don't blame anyone for feeling cynical. I blame the Conservatives for spreading cynicism, but I don't blame anyone for feeling it. But for myself, I'm still incredibly optimistic about our future as a country. Because everywhere I go, I see the amazing strength, decency, and courage of the British people. And because my life has taught me that no matter how tough things get, you can get through them. Brighter days can follow even the darkest. That was true for me as a teenager, and I know it's true for our country today. Our future is bright. Better days lie ahead for our country, and Liberal Democrats, we know what must be done to reach them. Mend our broken politics, put real power in people's hands, support people through the awful cost of living crisis, save the NHS, fix care, and make cancer a top priority. Clean up our rivers and protect our precious environment. Build the economy of the future, lead the world, and spread prosperity and opportunity to all. This is our vision. These are our priorities. These are the big changes our country needs. So let me be crystal clear. Whenever the next election comes, every vote for the Liberal Democrats will be a vote to make these changes happen. And every Liberal Democrat elected to Parliament will fight tirelessly to make them happen. That's how we rebuild trust, restore hope, and repair our country. So, conference. We have our policies, we have our priorities, and very soon we will have our election too. I know you're ready. I've seen you on the streets of Shropshire, on the doorsteps of Devon. I've seen your determination, your dedication, and it makes me so proud to be one of your number. And I firmly believe that together we are the strongest campaigning force in British politics. We have taken chunks out of the blue wall. We have made it start to crumble. Now let's smash it for good. The British people are desperate for hope. The British people are desperate for change. The British people are desperate for a fair deal, and we are the ones who can make it happen. So let's get to it.
Well, they're on their feet at the Liberal Democrat Party conference there. You can see in the middle Ed Davey's wife amongst those cheering the party leader on at the end of his first in-person conference speech. It was an assured speech. He was very relaxed, actually, at the beginning as he stood up and talked up Liberal Democrat successes. And there have been quite a few over the last few years in terms of what he called historic by-election victories, and he named them all, which isn't surprising. If you weren't sure about Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats' strategy, well, it was spelt out very clearly in this speech, and it is to demolish the Conservatives, what he calls the blue wall. There he is, hugging his wife, and it was emotional at parts too, hugging his deputy leader, Daisy Cooper, there, and now obviously being greeted by his MPs. We're hoping to speak to Daisy Cooper in just a few minutes' time. But yes, the strategy, once he had also demolished the Conservatives' record in power for 13 years, is to take as many Conservative seats in the south and southwest of England as is possible. He said in 2019 they talked about demolishing Labour's red wall. Well, he's going to do the same with the Tories' blue wall. Interestingly, though, but perhaps not surprisingly, the biggest, most sustained cheer came when he pledged to fix the UK's broken relationship with Europe. He did not, though, which many of those in the hall might have wanted to hear, pledge to rejoin the single market or rejoin the EU. And he's been asked about it several times. The most difficult part of the speech, which was emotional and moving, as he talked in detail about how he lost both his parents at quite a young age to cancer. He was 15 when his mother died, and the heart of this speech was about what he wants to see in terms of improvements to cancer care in the UK in order to boost survival rates. Social care was another part of his vision for improving the health service, and he devoted the end of his speech to hope. that we must have hope in this time of cynicism. There he is, enjoying his moment. Let me bring in our political correspondent, Jessica Parker. What did you make of it? Because there are always two audiences, the one we've just seen in the hall, and, of course, voters outside as he tried to rally his troops for the general election that's coming.
It's a balancing act, isn't it, for any leader of a party when they're addressing their conference hall. They want to win the room and motivate people ahead of a general election, but they also don't want to just say things that will appeal to party activists who are extremely invested in the party but aren't necessarily the same in terms of their outlook on political issues as the rest of the population. It seemed to me he prioritised more the electorate than he did the people in the room. I mean, he spent an awfully long time trying to, as you were saying, demolish the Conservative record. There was, I think, two big chunks really to the speech that were notable.
And barely anything about the Labour Party, of course.
A mention around Brexit policy and the European Union, but it was very much about running through recent Conservative Prime Ministers, of which, of course, there have been a few, criticising them all on economic policy, cost of living, sewage, lots of different areas. And then, of course, the other big section was that really personal and quite moving section where he talked about losing both of his parents to cancer. I think he probably really had the room at that moment because it is a deeply personal and painful story. But what he was saying is that everyone's lives is touched by cancer, and he's presenting this plan to try and improve treatment.
Tell us a little bit more about the plan, because he did talk about improvements in diagnostics, the blood test that could help people themselves self-diagnose. But what about what they are pledging specifically? Because, funnily enough, he didn't actually spell that out clearly in the speech.
Yes, I sort of expected him to go into some detail, but actually, yes, he just said we've presented our plan today. But one of the centrepieces of this seems to be this new legal right, they say, that they would give patients that after 2 months or 2 months after diagnosis, you'd be guaranteed to be on treatment. And he was talking about how important, of course, it is to catch cancer early in order to effectively treat it. So that seems to be the sort of centrepiece of the cancer policy. But he was also just generally talking about waiting times in the NHS, social care. We know he's talked about that a lot before, but linking that as well to the pressures that are experienced in the NHS. And we have been hearing from the Lib Dems that they really want to focus on health in the run-up to the general election. They were doing a lot on cost of living, but on the doorstep they're hearing that a lot of people have health and the NHS as a priority, and it was very clear in that speech that he really wanted to hammer that home. And that's, I think, one of the reasons we can say that he was definitely trying to reach out beyond the room.
In terms of that sustained cheer when he talked about the UK's relationship with Europe, it really is telling that that's where the soul of the party still is, but the leadership is some way off.
Cautious. I think the leadership's cautious. I mean, so he said, the line he sort of ended on was they wanted a better future with Europe. And what does that actually mean? I mean, you could read it in several different ways, but he did not say our long-term aim is to rejoin the European Union. And I think you're right, a lot of people in that room, in terms of the Liberal Democrats, they feel it is in their DNA to want to rejoin the European Union and to be much clearer about that. And there is some pressure on him from within the party to go more boldly on that. But there are also people, I think, who sympathise with an approach that is cautious, because I've been speaking to activists, some of whom say even your most ardent Remainers are actually still don't really want to return to the chaos of talking about that subject because of how traumatic they found it in recent years. So there is some support for his cautious approach as well. And I think he would say, well, look at our by-election record recently. This strategy is working.
Well, he said, of course, that they've come back into the southwest, much of which voted to leave the EU. Exactly. And, of course, Jo Swinson, one of his predecessors, is one of those who was sacrificed, really, in 2019, partly because of the party's policy on Europe. One of the things he talked about towards the end, which I didn't mention, is on proportional representation, on the electoral system. Another very key part of the party's DNA, to use your words.
Yeah, I mean, we've been here before, haven't we, in terms of the Lib Dems
I remember it well.
Yeah, you were talking about it, the Lib Dems pushing to have a PR system. It obviously didn't work last time around when they wanted to do that and when they were in coalition with the Conservative Party. But yes, I mean, they obviously have long wanted to have a PR system over first past the post. But I think it's quite interesting, because how are they actually going to deliver these things? Because he's seems to be ruling out any kind of possibility of a coalition with the Conservatives. Less clear in terms of what his relationship with Labour might be if they were in government. And one assumes if it were, for example, a Labour government after the next general election, but would they need some Lib Dem support? Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. Would this be a way of the Lib Dems trying to, again, pressure the governing party into moving in that direction?
It seems unlikely at the moment, but of course we don't know. We've got a year, perhaps, to wait until the next general election. That relationship, though, with Labour, they weren't mentioned that often in the speech. It was all directed at the Conservatives. And that does raise the question of exactly what that relationship would be. Of course, the Liberal Democrats and Labour have both rejected at leadership level, not necessarily MP level, but at leadership level, any idea of pacts, coalitions. But working together, is that a possibility in some parts of the country?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, they've ruled out the idea of pacts. But I think, as we were discussing earlier, you are going to see the Lib Dems focus on seats that they really think that they could win, and maybe not necessarily in seats where they think Labour's got a much better chance of winning. Now, they'll say that's not a pact, that is just our strategy. But I think there is a big open question as to what their relationship would be after the next general election if you did see a Labour government or Labour as the largest party, because depending on how many MPs the Lib Dems get, that is going to be quite crucial. It's always about the maths, isn't it, in Parliament? It is always about the maths. How much can you pressure, if you're the Lib Dems, the governing party, in terms of bringing forward the policies that you want to see? I think Ed Davey doesn't want to go into much detail on that at the moment for understandable political reasons.
Well, and also because we didn't really hear much about his time as a cabinet minister. He did mention it, though, when he was talking about renewable energy, because, of course, he was the energy secretary during the coalition government. Do you think they've, to some extent, buried those demons of being trounced at the election after being in government with the Conservatives?
Yeah, it was, if you remember in the last election, 2019, Jo Swinson, it did kind of come back to haunt her, didn't it? It was brought up quite a lot, I remember, in the debates. I think it does feel further away now. He mentioned it in the context of tackling climate change and their policies on renewables, and that got quite a big applause too, actually, in terms of...
well, let's test the temperature in a few minutes' time with Helen Capp. But first of all, let's talk to the Liberal Democrats' deputy leader, who's there at Bournemouth for us, Daisy Cooper. Hello to you, Daisy. Just one moment. We can't quite hear you. I'll say hello again and let's... Try again.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
And we can hear you. Hooray, we have a connection to you down in Bournemouth. I know it's very windy down there and you've rushed out of the conference hall after Ed Davey's speech. We've been talking about the speech. Can I zone in immediately on this new legal right for cancer patients to start treatment within 2 months of an urgent referral? It's the newsline, the press release that you put out. But how is it different to the government's target?
Well, the fact is that this was a fantastic speech that we heard today, and I think what Ed Davey really showed was that behind the statistics there are people's lives, and he set out in a very personal way how cancer has affected his life, and I'm sure that many people in the hall and around the country watching it like me would have been trying to battle the tears and failing to do so because it clearly moved me to tears. The fact of the matter is that we have this 62-day target, or the government has a 62-day target, which means that from the point of an urgent referral for potential suspected cancer, people should both get a diagnosis and start their treatment.
Yes.
But we have been missing that target every single year since 2015, or rather the government has failed to meet that target every single month and every single year since 2015. We are talking about making this a legal right and to putting lots of other interventions into place to make sure that we meet that target. Right,
you'll make it a right, I understand that, and it was very moving and very emotional, Ed Davey's personal story. And that will be a stronger and robust pledge in terms of giving people the opportunity and the assurance to take legal action against the government. Will it actually achieve or improve anything?
Yes, I hope it will, because this particular target, as you say, has been in place for some time, but the government hasn't met it for a very long time. There are lots of other elements to our strategy on cancer as well. We've talked about protecting the National Research Centre for Cancer, which is potentially at risk from the Conservatives. We talked about putting in place a similar law to the Americans, where they are making sure that they create a new piece of legislation to make sure there is enough research going into rare cancers answers
Yes.
as well. What we've set out today is our commitment to tackle this issue in a way that the government hasn't.
Right, but you've pledged an extra £4 billion, a substantial amount of money in NHS cancer treatment over the next 5 years. But at the same time, you've scrapped your signature pledge for the 1p rise on income tax, which would have raised that money. So where will you find it?
Well, during a cost of living crisis, the Liberal Democrats believe that you should not be raising taxes on struggling families. But you will know from announcements we've made in recent months and years that whenever we've made an announcement, we've looked to raising taxes from the big corporations and the big banks.
Sure.
You'll know, of course, we were the first party to call for a windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies. We've called on the Prime Minister to reverse his tax cuts for the big banks of £3 billion. So when it comes to the next general election, we'll have a fully costed manifesto and we'll set out precisely where we'll be raising the money.
Right, but you have to replace £7 billion, which would have been raised by that 1 penny on income tax. You're not going to just find it by a new windfall tax on bank profits.
No, as I say, there are lots of different ways in which you can raise taxes, but without raising taxes on struggling families.
Right.
These are the fundamental principles underpinning our approach at the next general election.
What about the house building targets? I mean, we heard the former leader of the party, Tim Farron, railing against Young Liberals, calling them Thatcherites, saying it was perhaps the most right-wing thing he'd heard at Liberal Democrat Party conference because they voted to restore and keep your 380,000 house building target a year. What's going on?
Well, Tim Farron is a very passionate advocate for housing. As you probably know, he's been campaigning for a very long time.
But not a target.
To tackle the second homes. Well, he's been tackling for a very long time the issue of second homes in his constituency and the fact that's pushing young people out of his local area. But the fact of the matter is, I was very concerned about coming up with a big target housing number because I'm worried that the public will conflate that in their minds with the top-down diktat of numbers from Westminster, which we've had under the Conservatives. What I'm pleased about is that under our policy yesterday, we have rejected that top-down diktat number from Westminster, and instead that any future housing target will start with looking at housing need in individual communities, and then you will work with local communities to build that number up according to what you need in your community.
But you've got the target's going to be
kept. And
kept.
any restrictions in that local area.
Yeah, but Daisy, the target's being kept. That 380,000 target is being kept. The leadership was overruled and schooled by younger members of your party.
Under the Conservative system, there is a top target, which is then broken up into lots of smaller numbers, and local authorities are told by diktat how many homes they need to build.
All right.
Under the Liberal Democrats model, which we adopted yesterday, we would look at housing need in individual communities, and then we'll look at what other houses they need, building that number from the bottom up. That would be tailored to local communities, and communities crucially would have a say in making sure we get the right houses in the right places with the right infrastructure. It's a fundamentally different approach.
Were they Thatcherite in the way Tim Farron described them, Young Liberals?
Look, I think it was a very passionate and heated debate yesterday, and that's
right.
one of the most wonderful things about Liberal Democrat Conference. We can debate these things.
Well, you look like you're enjoying it, or have enjoyed it, I should say. Let's talk about the EU. Do you, Daisy Cooper, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, want to rejoin the EU?
Look, we know that this Conservative government has just really broken the trust that we've had between
But that's not the answer to my question, Daisy. That's not the answer. You're not answering the question I'm asking. Is your heart in rejoining the EU?
Look, the Liberal Democrats have a roadmap towards building a much stronger relationship between the UK and the EU and putting the UK at the heart of Europe again. But right now, it's a question of emphasis. I know from the people that I speak to in my surgeries and on the doorstep that what they are facing is a crisis in the NHS and a crisis in the cost of living. And that's why the Liberal Democrats are putting our emphasis on those two issues right now.
So it's not a priority rejoining the EU or the single market?
You know, there are real crises facing people in their everyday lives right now. That doesn't dilute our passion for our internationalism or our European outlook on life. We want the UK to have to be right back at the heart of Europe. But right now, our emphasis is on tackling the crisis in our NHS, protecting our environment, and tackling the cost of living crisis.
Daisy Cooper in Bournemouth, thank you very much for joining us, and to you, Jessica Parker, for keeping me company here in the studio. That's all we have time for today. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15 for Politics Live. Bye-bye.
Just laughing in the side chat with me was there. It's true though, like a lot of people don't know who to vote for. because most of the politicians are shit anyway. We need more independent MPs. I would say that's a good idea to have more independence. I've been saying that for ages anyway. I hate this whole fucking big tent bullshit when it comes to fucking parties anyway. Like, they can't even speak their own fucking mind in case you get fucking kiboshed with some kind of like party nonsense or whatever. So I think we need more independent people. Anyway, little waffle at the end. Back tomorrow as usual. I was going to say PMQs, but there's no fucking PMQs tomorrow, is there? I don't know when the Tory conference is on. I think it's on the weekend, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, there's a Tory speech to come and also the Labour one. Fuck knows when that is as well. You'll see them eventually pop up on the channel. Anyway, hope you enjoy the rest of your day, night, whatever it is. Ta-da! Back tomorrow.